goes live in 2 minutes. Lynn Cullen live in 1 minute. Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live at pghcitypaper.com. Email your questions and comments to Lynn at pghcitypaper.com.
Well, hi, Mudville. I know, it's tough. Maybe some of you have the day off so you can just stay hunkered down trying to get through your heads that the football season's over. Anyway, guys, I'm not here to do a sports talk show, but I do have to say, I did watch 2 games. I watched the Steelers. I watched the Packers. And I do want to say this, because those are the teams that I root for. I do want to say this. They may have lost, but they were brilliant losses. They can hold their head up losses. Well done. I was proud. Of, they're both so injured and no one would have thought. Both of them should have won their games. It's sad. Anyway, I just want to say, I thought, usually it's not my style, but I took comfort in the fact that, man, they played their hearts out. Looked good. That's all I have to say. And everybody, don't let poor Toussaint take it all on himself. I mean, poor guy. We wouldn't have been there without all the good he did. So just poor guy. What a way to end your season anyway. But, speaking of the football game, so I do have to say this. I was so stunned at one point. I think this is from the Green Bay, Arizona game. I guess it was one commentator in particular. I want to say Collinsworth, but I don't know that that's who it was. I don't know. He said 2 things in the course of the game that just blew my mind because it showed how much a part of the allure of the game is the violence. We like to pretend it's no, that's not what it's. But you realize that the whole thing about the NFL is the adulation of these glorious masculine specimens putting their bodies on the line, willing to, I was thinking, even Roethlisberger yesterday, throwing and throwing and throwing. He has an arm that anyone else, you would be in rehab. You would be wearing a sling. You would be, and you think that ain't gonna, as somebody who's had many injuries myself, I was looking at him and thinking, do you know what your arm's gonna feel like in 10 years? And then in 30 years, you'll be lucky if you can move it. And that's if your head is still functional. Anyway, so we know this, and we're filled with all kinds of push-pull. But listen to I wrote it down. I was so stunned. They got all excited on one play. It was and here's what the commentator said. He was so admiring of this player. There you go, slamming your head in there, time after time. This was supposed to be high praise. Slamming your head in there time after time. How can we still embrace a game in which the guys who are the play-by-play and the color guys are leading us into, there you are. You're killing yourselves for us. We love it. Banging your head time after time. And we know what that does now. I would have thought that the NFL, silly me, would have said to all of their on-air people, don't say things like that. Don't draw attention to heads. I did note that when somebody goes down, they now they mostly ignore it. They say, and then maybe they go to a commercial break. And I was thinking, you know what? Maybe people lying broken on the field lets them make more money because you get to put in more commercial breaks. It was a thought. It was a thought. And then I thought, okay, so here I am, and I'm so into this game, but I'm also aware of the harm that these guys are doing to themselves. And I'm listening to the people guiding me through the game, the announcers, with this positive and this adulation of the bang, bang, bang. Slamming your head in there time after time. It was... He was beside himself with delight. And you know what I wrote under it? Because I scribbled it down. It's like the Germans. It's like the Germans saying, we didn't know. We didn't know. Yes, we enjoyed the games, but we didn't realize. We didn't know. It's not true. It's not true of the Germans, and it's not true of us. We know. Just saying. And here was the same guy later in the game said this. Oh, it was after that game had concluded, the Green Bay game. With adulation, I put down, he said, those men putting everything on the line. The injuries. We say thank you very much for a great show. That's what he said. Those men putting everything on the line. The injuries. We say thanks very much for a great show. Let me tell you, it was a great show. It was one of the better, in terms of spectator. That Green Bay game was one of the greatest games I've ever seen. But he actually said, he added to it what gave us pleasure, the great show, was the injuries. This is the same guy who said slamming your head in their time. God! Okay, I just want to say, we know. Okay, that's all I want to say. We know. Happy Martin Luther King Day. Is that what you're supposed to say? Is that a happy one, or is that like saying Happy Good Friday? I mean, is it, or Happy Yom Kippur? Anyway, I mark Martin Luther King Day. Great man. Great man. Fight the effort to turn him into some kind of like watered down cartoon figure, please. I was just reading some quotes of his about, I mean, clearly he was not a capitalist. He thought the system was at the base of poverty, and poverty striking the African American community more than other communities per capita. Anyway, maybe I'll come back to him. I also, in terms of my TV viewing, I don't know what was more brutal, the football games or the Democratic debate last night. Both required. I don't know. So did you watch that? I want to say, I think without a doubt, I was a little surprised, actually. Bernie Sanders won that debate. It's his passion. He's passionate about what he's saying. Hillary, man, she's hard to warm up to. She is so robotic. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to say, show some. I just, and you know it's because she's competent as hell. She's controlled as hell. This is somebody who, yeah, all of that. But I don't like her. I'm not even sure I like him, but at least he's, and he's daring to say things that you're absolutely not supposed to say. He's definitely channeling the same kind of anger and sense that we want to just upend the same old, upend these goddamn parties. Same anger as what Trump's playing. I mean, Bernie, I thought, I'd seen other debates. He did not come on that strong. He clearly has, I don't know, taken a lesson or two or whatever. He came out swinging. And I thought he was really, without a doubt, the victor. I'm willing to bet that after that debate, his poll numbers go up and hers do not. I'm not saying that he can take the whole thing. I just can't believe that could be. But this should give us Democrats pause for the general election. Let us recall that 8 years ago, Hillary was the slam dunk nominee. And then she went, right? Right now, Hillary is a slam dunk nominee. And I don't think she's a good candidate. I'm not saying she wouldn't be a good president. I'm saying I don't think she's a good candidate. For as much charisma as her husband has, she doesn't have a smidge. I'm sorry. I mean, I'll vote for her. Last night was one of the I looked at it and I thought, geez, lady, come on. Could you be like a person in an era when what do we want? We keep hearing the word authenticity. She just doesn't seem authentic at all. She seems contrived. She seems like she's been a contrivance probably since day one. I don't know. Is it conceivable that the same thing that happened 8 years ago could happen to her again? Blindsided by a young black man 8 years ago? Blindsided by an old white guy this time around? Is it possible? I mean, Bernie sometimes... He, by the way, sounds exactly like Larry David. They both have the exact same accent. Larry David didn't have to stretch one whit to parody him. Not one whit. They have the exact same accent. And then the fact that they look alike. Jesus, God. So sometimes it's a little hard for me. Every time I look at him, I see Larry David, and then, even though he's gotten really good at this debate stuff, he was every once in a while when he's not on, when she was speaking, or O'Malley, remember him, when he was speaking, and he wouldn't be on camera, or thought he wasn't on camera, he'd be doing something that looked like a doddering old man kind of a thing to do. He'd be like looking in his pockets. And it all looked very sort of like old and doddering. Huh? Did you see that? He kept doing this? Well, I don't know what that is. That's just a thing he does. But or here's the other doddering one. Oh, when they had questions from... They had some weird questions. So the first question that came on video from a young black woman, and she does this whole thing and asks the question, and then he said, I didn't understand that. I mean, he literally, and I was thinking, did he not understand her because she was black? Or he couldn't hear her because of the video, maybe audio wasn't up enough? And then I thought, well, whatever it was, it made him look old. But in every other way, he looked younger than Hillary in his passion. In his passion. Margie says, I met Hillary face to face, and she was like a robot. Yeah, but Margie, you met her in one of those things where you were one of 500,000 people. She was probably saying, hello, hello. It'd be hard not to be robotic in that situation. Or certainly less than sincere. But there is something robotic about her. You feel like you would never, ever, ever know who she was. I don't know. She worries me. So, that's all I have to say. That's all about that. Obit of the day. So that I'm talking about Bernie put me in mind of death, right. Richard Hendrickson, ladies and gentlemen. No, that's what I thought. Man, he lived a good life, long life, too. 103. Richard Hendrickson. Richard Hendrickson was a farmer. And his farm was on Long Island, sort of like on the tip. So, I mean, there was the water right there, right outside his farm. Richard Hendrickson was asked in 1930. Yeah, I wasn't there either. 1930. He was asked by the government to serve in a volunteer capacity for the United States Weather Bureau. The U.S. Weather Bureau had wanted citizen volunteers to note the weather twice a day. They had thousands of these people all over the country, in the mountains, in remote areas, on the coasts, in the heartland, in the south, everywhere. There was like over 8,000 of these volunteer weather observers. And the government would put on their property gauges. They would have a wind speed gauge, a rainfall thingamajig, thermometers, and stuff. So they were given the equipment. Their job was simply to note it twice a day. Well, Richard Hendrickson dutifully did this for 85 years. For 85 years. When he started, Herbert Hoover was the president. When he stopped, Barack Obama was the president. He was doing something that, well, speaking of presidents, that Thomas Jefferson did himself. Thomas Jefferson kept really careful records of the weather over 4 decades. Now, obviously, Richard Hendrickson was over 8 decades, but Jefferson, like Hendrickson, was a farmer. And the weather is exceedingly important. So he kept a record of what the weather was on the east end of Long Island for 85 years. And when others began, they still have these people around, but now everybody does it on their computers. They send their stuff in. Up until last year, when he was still doing, or earlier, yeah, it was last year, not because it's 2016. But he quit. He was still doing it 12 months ago. And when he quit, he was still using the same instruments they had given him. He was writing things down and using carbon paper. Where do you find carbon paper now? He had a rotary phone, and he would call in his... He never had a computer and did not want one. Okay, so every once in a while, like about once a month, he would prepare a fuller written report. And some of this stuff reads like poetry. Listen to one of the reports. Many feathered friends from the south are either on the lawns and meadows or are singing in the thicket. Whoa. I'm loving this guy. Here's another. If you are going eeling, I guess fishing for eels. If you are going eeling, one needs a long-handled axe to get a hole through that thick ice. He did this through drought. He did it through flood. He did it through fog. You know, the U.S. Postal Service's mantra. He did it more than they did it because he did it 7 days a week. Once he went on a vacation. And believe me, he was a wreck. But he had someone he trusted do the entries for him in his absence. The reason he went on a vacation, he took his wife, his first wife, Dorothea, to New Zealand in 1959. Why? Why would this farmer from Long Island, who never went anywhere, all of a sudden go to New Zealand for a vacation? Well, I'll tell you why. Because he won the trip from the Hormel Company as a prize for having bought the 1 billionth can of Spam. Wow! The 1 billionth can of Spam was in 1959, and they're still on the shelf. He bought it. So off to New Zealand with him. And someone else was left behind to do the... All right. I think that's all I got. Except there's one other little factoid about him. I love it. Every New Year's Eve, Richard Hendrickson, and that was right up until he didn't do it this time, but he did it a year ago. Every New Year's Eve, he would fire off one of the many cannons that he had dotted that were all around on his farm. And it says here that he knew it rattled the chickens, but he just had to do it. He'd fire off a cannon? Okay, so anyway, that's Richard Hendrickson, who took over 150,000 readings, no matter what the weather. There are, even as I speak, 8,700 of these observers still doing this day after day. It seems odd that they're still doing it day after day after in this day and age. But they are. He was so far and away the longest served person. I mean, when he started, hurricanes didn't even have names. All through Hurricane Sandy. Think about this. He would have been, when was Sandy? He would have been 98, 99. Through Hurricane Sandy, he's still doing the twice a day, even though he lost buildings on his farm. I mean, it was horrific, as you know, Sandy. Just saying. Let's see. We got an emailer here. Brooklyn writes, I've watched Hillary on some talk shows recently, such as The Ellen Show and Seth Meyers. In a talk show forum, she comes across, I agree with you, as much more likable. I agree in these so-called debates, she comes across as very dispassionate, no inflection in her voice, starts out many sentences with, you know. Brooke writes, my 20-year-old daughter is voting for Bernie Sanders. I can see the appeal. Me too. My mother said the same thing. She happened to see Hillary on The Ellen Show. And she said, why can't she be like that? Indeed. Because I guess that's not presidential. You know, she might have some of the problems that no other candidate for president has had in that she's a woman. Sort of like Barack Obama had the black man problem. He could never appear to be too angry. That's what he thought, and I think he thought correctly. An angry black man would scare people. And maybe an angry or passionate woman would, her voice might go up, but she might sound shrill or, whatever. So maybe this tone she's adopted of just, of just being on top of it. Smart, capable, unflappable. But it comes across then as sort of unlikable. Like you're looking for, where's the human here? Could I relate to you in some manner here, miss? And stop telling me you're a grandmother. That ain't doing it for me. But, just whatever. I don't know. I mean, I don't pretend to know. And it troubles me. It's troubled me for a long time. Yike. Second obituary of the day. Yes, ladies and gentlemen. This guy and I think we sort of crossed paths but never met. Stanley Siegel. He and I have a few things in common. We're Jewish. Also, work in television. Also, worked in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Although he got fired in Green Bay. After immersing himself in 45 pounds of lemon jello to simulate the dark, lamentable plight of fruits that wind up in some horrible cafeteria. So he was empathizing with a piece of pear stuck in a jello mold. Why he was doing that, I don't know. And he apparently did it, and the station in Green Bay said, "You're out of here. This is bullshit." I mean, I think there were other offenses leading up to it because this guy didn't do anything by the book. He was smart as hell. He was a lunatic. He ended up in New York City hosting a TV talk show in the city on WABC, I think it was. And you can't even make this show up. I mean, you could not imagine what this show was. This show should have been national. I guess he was before his time. His show aired at like 9 on weekdays. And my guess is I was in New York at the same time. This is the early 70s. And he did the craziest things on this show. You cannot imagine. For one thing, he had his psychiatrist. This was a regular gimmick on the show. His psychiatrist would come on, and Stanley would lie down on a couch and literally do about a 10 to 15 minute psychiatric session with his shrink as part of the show. And he would do it. Well, this is the kind of TV that is like, it's car wreck television. It's like, what's he going to do next? And the critic for the New York Times said this about him. He is generous, contemptible, thoughtful, abrasive, disarming, insufferable, and wholly charming. I mean, just like a nutcase. How he didn't jump up to a national level, I don't know, but he never did. Tales of him in Green Bay, tales of him throughout his career are legend. Stanley Siegel. Where did I see that he's got some interesting relatives? Okay, his cousin is still, Lorraine Newman, one of the first Saturday Night Live folks, Lorraine Newman. And his other cousin is the great conductor, Michael Tilson Thomas. Stanley Siegel. What a family that must have been. Jeez. So anyway, I guess with Stanley, you had to have been there. You had to have been there. It was impossible to describe. God bless him. He was 79, which surprised me. I thought he was more my age. I ain't that old. I'm not. Oh. Okay, so what? If you think it's cold outside today, May I suggest you go see this film that everybody thinks is going to win Best Movie? The Revenant. That film chills you to the bone. I mean, what it does, it is, that film is one that sort of grabbed me by the throat and held me for 2 hours plus, I think. I didn't want to be there. But this is great filmmaking, I guess, when you are transported into another reality. Wow. I must say, wow. But you see how people on the frontier, in weather like this, they're out in it. I mean, in the movie, they're out in it. They're in the woods. They're in the rivers. There is no shelter. They're walking in water with their clothes getting soaking wet and then going back onto the land. Well, they would have to have frozen. You would think, wouldn't you freeze to death? You see what we are able to endure, what we must have endured, not the likes of me, but what people could endure before all the accoutrements that we are incapable of living without now, like heat, running water, basic things. Wow. So I don't want to hear any complaints about the weather today. We got warm clothes. We have shoes. We have food. And we don't have people trying to kill us hiding behind every tree. Or animals willing to kill us. Jeez. It is, I think, a pretty damn good movie. I just wanted to say it's a pretty damn good movie. Really tough. And it shows, too, that in an environment that harsh, with so little to their names, I mean, these are human beings who have nothing. They're scrambling to stay alive, like the little birds outside today. They're scrambling to stay alive. And yet you do see in the relationship between the lead character that played by Leonardo DiCaprio and his son, such love that in this harshness of life, the most important thing, the thing that drives you, is love. I thought it was pretty remarkable. Thank you all who have wished me a happy birthday. Yes, indeedy it is. I was talking to my mother last night, and I said, Mom, just think. Think of all those years ago. She said, oh, I remember it. She said it was like 18 below zero. The night I was born, it was colder than this. And it was brutal. She remembers it well. So I said, well, it's pretty cold here now, too. I guess it's my kind of weather. It must be odd to have your child, have your little baby be as old as I am, or her son, who's about to turn 70 in March. It must be odd. My little baby is 70 years old. That's the other thing about the poor guy Wilkinson who did the readings. When you live to be 103, you outlive everybody. He buried all his wives and his only child, because that's what happens. He buried his son like 5 years ago. His son might have been, 80-something, late 80s or mid 80s. And I know that's my mother's greatest fear, of living too long. And she always says to her 3 children, "Don't you die on me!" But I'm thinking, geez, I think, none of us want to do that to her, because that would be a blow she doesn't want. She would handle it because she handles everything, but you wouldn't want to do it to her. So I'm trying to stay alive so I won't upset my mom. I am. I swear. I want to be there for my son, but I don't want to upset my mom. Those are the 2 things that are keeping me alive. I swear. That's it. Oh, man. Okay, what else we got here, guys? I got a whole bunch of stuff on immigrants, and it's not necessarily horrifying. I just want to point out a few things, okay, since it's a big issue. By the way, speaking of that, the difference between the Democratic debate as opposed to the Republican debate is like night and day, not just in what they're saying, but what they choose to talk about, what they see as issues. It's a totally different, it's like, I saw somebody say, are these guys running for president of the same country? It's like totally different realities. Anyway, back to immigrants. I was stunned a few days ago to see that Denmark, when you think of Denmark, I don't know about you, but I think of a relatively humane European little country. And I think of that because of their courageous treatment of Danish Jews during the Holocaust. While other European countries were handing their Jews over to the Germans, here, take them, we'll round them up for you. The Danes did not. And the Danes helped spirit out thousands of Jews and, famously, really took their lives in their hands to help. As a Jew, I will never forget that, and I've always felt warmly towards the Danes. But man, something's happened to them. Denmark, in case you didn't see it, because we don't care what goes on anywhere, Denmark is, they've passed a law, essentially, that says if you're a refugee and you're coming here, you're going to hand over to us all your valuables. You're going to give us your gold. You're going to give us your jewelry, because that's going to help pay us for the costs of having to deal with you. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. I mean, that puts them sort of like right where the Nazis were. That's what they said to the Jews. All right, give us your jewelry. Give us your everything you've got. And then we'll kill you. But still, confiscating somebody, a refugee who might be carrying with them everything that they possibly can. And Denmark is saying, sure, you want to come here? Fine, you come here, but you give us all that. Now, obviously, they're doing that so that none of them come. The Danes have even taken out newspaper ads in Lebanon informing people who think they might want to seek asylum there that welfare benefits for refugees have been cut in half. Now, a lot of countries are doing this over there. They're making it extremely unpalatable. They're making themselves excessively inhospitable so that these poor people seeking a safe haven will not think to come there. Finland is clamping down. They've called on asylum seekers to work without pay. I mean, the Europeans, I got to tell you, showing your stripes again, guys. Europe scares me again. This union they think they have is not holding. It's going to come falling apart. And when that falls apart, they'll be at each other's throats again. Watch. Okay, so then let's talk about immigrants and how everybody is so afraid of them. I'm always saying immigrants are the reason this country is great. And I will stick with that till the day I die. Because the people who are willing to risk life, limb, everything, to leave everything they know and go to a strange land where nothing is a certainty at all, those are the bravest. Those are the risk takers. Those are the ones you want. Now, granted, with this particular refugee wave, there is some concern about bad guys piggybacking on this sea of desperate people. But in general, if you want to find industrious, risk-taking strivers, immigrants, without a doubt, by definition. But I read a piece over the weekend that says, yeah, that's all true. But what immigrants really bring that is so precious to any country smart enough to welcome them is they bring a fresh perspective. They are looking at what we look at every day from a different angle. And when people are out of their comfort zone, which is what an immigrant is, they tend to be more creative in their thinking, more original. They become problem solvers. And if you're in their orbit, they open things up for you as well. Listen to this. You think it's pie in the sky I'm talking about? In the United States today, 13% of people in this country who were born somewhere else. Wait, they comprise 13% of the U.S. population was born someplace else. 13%. However, you know what the percentage is of who holds patents in this country? 1/3 of all patents are held by people who were born not here, somewhere else, and came here. Let's look at who's got the Nobel Prizes. Just the Nobels. We could do others. If you look at all the Americans who are holding on to a Nobel, 25% of them are immigrants. 30+% of the patent holders are immigrants, even though they comprise only 13% of the population. That then is a demographic group outperforming 2 or 3 times us native-born. refugees. Nabokov. Refugees. Tesla. Refugees, immigrants, Einstein. Refugees, Marie Curie. Refugees, Sigmund Freud. Marie Curie, so I mentioned her. She was born in Poland. She had dreams. She couldn't get them done in Poland, so she picked up at the age of 24. She left and goes to Paris. And as you know, she got 2 Nobel prizes by the time. And she was a woman! This was 1891 when she picks up and goes. Wow. So it is said that if you simply have these kind of strivers around you, it goads the rest of us to pick up our game a little bit. I mean, if you look at what is Google, Sergey Brin? I mean, a lot of the tech stuff that's going on here, these are immigrants doing it. It continues, folks.
Co-founder.
What? Co-founder, Sergey. So this guy says that when you mix with others, you begin to see the arbitrary nature of a lot of your assumptions. The arbitrariness of maybe some cultural thing that you thought, well, this is how we do this. And then somebody comes in and they're doing it in a different way. Once you start to recognize that there is another way of doing something or thinking about something, what happens? You're opening. Your mind is opening. All sorts of possibilities occur. The awareness of cultural variety helps set our minds free. I'm just saying. You just gotta wonder why people are so afraid. What is it they're afraid? They're afraid of the difference, when in fact that's exactly what they should embrace. Anyway, a guy named Eric Weiner was writing this stuff, and he talks about how in ancient Athens, in Rome, those amazing civilizations were ingatherers too, of the brightest, the best and the brightest. And he says this to end: not all cultural collisions end happily, of course, and not all immigrants, become geniuses. The adversity that spurs some to greatness can send others into despair. But as we wrestle with our own immigration and refugee policies, we would be wise to view the welcome mat not as charity, but rather as enlightened self-interest. Once creativity is in the air, we all breathe a more stimulating air. I mean, it seems so obvious to me, and yet you can't get this through people's heads. You just can't. The knee-jerk, the default position is fear of difference. And, you got people like Trump who, use that. They say they're what? He says they're murderers and rapists. You know what the reality is? I'm sure you do. And now with this thing in Cologne, what happens, the anti-immigrant folks always focus on things like that because it allows you to then paint the whole bunch as somehow dangerous, right? Here's reality, okay? I hate doing numbers, but these are pretty impressive. Between 1990, okay, and 2013, that's 23 years, the foreign-born share of the United States population nearly doubled. Now, that's the kind of thing that upsets people. In just those years from 1990, our foreign-born population nearly doubled. The number of unauthorized immigrants more than tripled. And yet, violent crime in the same period down 48%. Okay. If you listen to the Republicans, you would assume that if our immigration and even illegal immigration is up that high, then that our crime rate would be sky high too. Our crime rate, the immigrants are going this way, the crime rate is going just catapulting down. 48% drop in violent crime in those 13 years. No, 23 years, excuse me. 90 to 2013. My math, oh God. The study also shows that incarceration rates of native-born Americans far higher than the incarceration rate of immigrants or refugees or illegals. So the numbers in no way support the anti-immigrant fear-mongering that goes on. In no way. Just saying. A little bit of fact every once in a while. It's, breathe it in. Breathe it in. It's good for the Constitution. Speaking of the Constitution, man, I had this hankering to reread a book. I was casting around for a book to read, and I thought, well, wait a minute. Why not read something you loved, but you really can't remember? It'll still seem new to you. So I had to stop at 2 libraries to find it. I thought I had it at home. I can't find it. But I got it. And it's a historical novel by Gore Vidal, Lincoln. And it's just fascinating. So I'm reliving his presidency in such a wonderful way because Vidal knows the history and you get so much history from it. I said Constitution and that made me crazy because to see how we slipped into that Civil War, to see how Lincoln was seen by those around him, how he was vilified. I mean, we think of him as like Abraham Lincoln. During his tenure in the White House, he was not a popular man. People thought he was a dumbbell. People thought he didn't have an idea what he was doing. People thought he was timid and tentative. Amazing when you go back and get the history. All right. So, I don't know if you saw this thing, and it was, I guess, in the New York Times on yesterday, but it is the death rates for demographic groups in this country. The only ones going up are whites. Whites are, the gap between African American mortality rates and white are closing. because blacks are living longer in this country, even as we deal with, Black Lives Matter. Black mortality rates are going woo, and white are coming down. So much of this are lesser educated, they're Trump voters. They're Trump voters. And they know something's happened to their world. They're not sure what, but they'll follow him. They're listening to his narrative. But a lot of what's killing them are drug overdoses. And the drugs tend to be opiates. So often prescription drugs, and then when they can't get those, onto heroin. We've talked about this before, but it's reaching epidemic. One guy from the National Institute on Drug Abuse says these are startling numbers. These are tremendous increases. It looks like the kind of spike you saw when the AIDS epidemic took off. So it almost looks like a virus is loose, and it's just going after whites, 20s, 30s, and some in their 40s. So this once huge gap between death rates for blacks and whites, believe it or not, in just the last 10, 15 years has shrunk by 2/3. The smallest proportional and absolute gap in mortality between blacks and whites for more than a century. And do you know why blacks aren't dying from this new drug scourge? This is amazing. And the last thing I'll tell you on Martin Luther King Day. They think that the reason blacks don't have these opioid addictions like whites do is racism. And you know why? Because doctors are more reluctant to prescribe narcotic painkillers to black people. Studies have shown it. They don't. Not to black people. You know why? Because in their racist heads, they think, I'm not giving him a prescription for this. He's going to turn around and sell it on the corner. I'm not giving him a prescription. He's just going to become an addict. So they don't give the OxyContin to the black patient. They give it to their white patients, and they kill them with their kindness. And the blacks have been spared this latest drug scourge by virtue of white racism. Not exactly what Dr. King had in mind, but I share that fact with you for what it's worth. Stay warm. Remember the Revenant if you get too cold. Remember the Revenant, take all your clothes off and stand there because they bathed outside in that. Yeah. Gee whiz. Can't imagine it. Okay, bye.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper, Steel City Media, and its advertisers.